Hi, my name is Amy Hinnenkamp, and this is my video for Action Research EDRE 5550 for the University of Wyoming. In order to conduct an action research study, you first need to diagnose a problem of practice that is personal to you in your teaching. Next, you need to research the problem through a literature review. Then you need to devise a plan of action that includes the specifics of what you will teach, how you will teach it, the data you will collect, and how you will collect it. Next, you implement your plan of action. While implementing that plan, you should be collecting and analyzing your data on a daily basis. Weekly, you should reflect and replan your steps. This is a 4 to 6 week cyclical process. Afterwards, you need to identify your findings. Action research is different from qualitative and quantitative research because both of those researches collect data based on observations with no change in practice, where action research, the data is collected based on a change in practice. Action research also includes social justice, democratic participation, and community empowerment. The first article I used for my study asked, how can we research articles already written and combine their findings to develop the vocabulary knowledge of English language learners? Data collection included research articles collected concerning the following topics: limited vocabulary of ELLs, transfer of cognate knowledge, and effective vocabulary instruction. Key findings were that there are two challenges when designing vocabulary interventions for ELL students. First, the selection of target words for instruction. Second, the large deficits in vocabulary knowledge for ELLs and the limited time for direct instruction. I learned that it is important to focus on words that students are unlikely to learn on their own exposure to English. It is also important to focus on words that students will encounter frequently in text and oral language. It is important to develop creative ways to expose ELL students to word meanings throughout the school day. I will use this information in my study and in my classroom by looking through read-aloud books to find vocabulary words that frequently occur in text. I can pre-teach the important vocabulary by showing real pictures and acting out the words where possible. My plan of implementation includes looking through the read-aloud books, finding the pertinent vocabulary words that often occur in text, pre-teaching those words by saying and spelling the words, showing real pictures and objects, and making up songs and actions to go with those vocabulary words. The next article I read focused on how you scaffold the language and literacy development of ELL students. Some key findings were that there are different levels of language acquisition that require scaffolding for language and literacy development for ELL students. Teachers need to use wait time as it is necessary for ELL students to develop literacy and language development. Turn and talk partnerships not only build literacy and language development of ELL students, but also build their confidence. I learned that teachers who provide sufficient response time give ELL students the time to process what they hear in English, think of a response in their native language, and translate their thoughts into English as best they can. Teachers can check for understanding student comprehension by using turn and talk activities that share their learning with a partner. Homogeneous pairing should be used to reduce student anxiety, while heterogeneous pairing should provide peer models. I will use this information in my study and in my classroom by asking a question, waiting 3 to 5 seconds for a student response. I compare ELL students together so they have time to talk in Spanish and formulate a response. I compare ELL students with English as their first language to use as models for how to respond to a question in English. In order to do this, I will ask students a question and wait 3 to 5 seconds before I call on a student for a response. I will also use the Think, Pair, Share. Students will have the opportunity to practice wait time with one another in English and Spanish. The next article I read asked, how does vocabulary relate to ELL students? What classroom strategies are most effective in teaching vocabulary to ELL students? Key findings were that there is a difference between social English and academic English. ELL students learn social English much more quickly than academic English. Pre-teaching vocabulary, focusing on cognates, scaffolding, including technology, encouraging oral language use, and modeling correct usage are all effective ways to teach vocabulary instruction to ELL students. I learned that teachers should not assume that an ELL student has the academic English necessary for a particular lesson if they can speak social English. Teachers can pre-teach vocabulary before reading a story by using role play, gestures, showing real objects, pointing to pictures, drawing pictures, and providing the word in English and in the student's native language. I can use this information in my classroom by pre-teaching vocabulary to students by providing the word in English and in all students' native languages. In my plan of implementation, I will pre-teach pertinent vocabulary to students in English as well as Spanish. The next article I read asked, how do classroom teachers help Spanish-speaking immigrant students become successful at school? Also, how can teachers anticipate possible language difficulties so they can encourage oral communication in ELL students? Data was collected by teacher-led student question and answer responses that were tallied and recorded to see if Spanish-speaking students were allotted the same opportunities to respond and if their responses were on topic. Teachers were also surveyed about their reasons for calling or not calling on Spanish-speaking students. Key results included that teachers avoided calling on Spanish-speaking students, stating that they were respecting the silent period ELL students go through. When Spanish-speaking students were called on to answer a question, low-level questions were usually asked. A matrix was formed to show how teachers could encourage Spanish-speaking students to orally participate more in class depending on if their answer was correct, partially correct, answered in another language, answered with a question, answered incorrectly, or were silent. I learned that the language acquisition theory states language learners experience a silent period where time is spent receiving language input before they develop oral language skills. Teachers, however, may assume they are respecting ELL students in the silent period by not calling on them or by asking lower-level questions to get simple right answers, and therefore limit participation opportunities. Furthermore, teachers may not set high expectations for ELL students. I can use this information in my classroom by encouraging more student talk, by praising students for answering questions, restating their responses, and asking for more information, and asking a student that doesn't respond to a question, the question again after a few students respond. I can also ask high-level questions to all students. In my plan of implementation, I will ask high-level questions to all students, praise students for answering a question, whether it's right or wrong, ask for more information to elicit more talk, and ask a student that doesn't respond to a question with the same question again after a few students respond. The next article I read asked, what does research tell us about how students acquire vocabulary? What must instruction do to help students develop the kind of vocabulary that will contribute to their reading success? Data collected included research articles concerning the following topics: vocabulary and its connection to reading comprehension, instruction for vocabulary development, and instruction for teaching specific words. Key results included young students who do not have large vocabularies or effective word learning strategies often struggle to achieve comprehension. Effective instruction includes opportunities for both incidental and intentional word learning. I learned that teachers can help students build large vocabularies through incidental word learning and read-alouds by relating certain words to their existing knowledge. Teachers can help students build large vocabularies through intentional word learning by teaching words that are important to understanding a specific reading selection or concept, and by teaching words that are generally useful for students to know and are likely to encounter with some frequency in their reading. I can use this information in my classroom by asking students to make text-to-self connections to relate words to their existing knowledge. I can pre-teach vocabulary words that will occur frequently in a read-aloud. In my plan of implementation, I will pre-teach vocabulary words that students need to know in order to understand a read-aloud. I will ask the students to make text-to-self connections during the book that relates to these words. The final article that I read asked, what strategies were being used by ELL teachers? Which of these strategies were deemed most effective? 20 educators were interviewed and asked about the strategies that they felt were most effective in working with ELL students. Key findings included that 4 strategies were deemed as most effective: gestures and visual cues, repetition and opportunities for practicing skills, use of objects, real props, and hands-on materials. I learned that total physical response involves active participation of students who learn new action words by watching and imitating as the teacher says and physically demonstrates each word. It is better to use actions paired with pictures than merely to translate English words. Often, repetition can be used to increase a child's comfort level within the classroom. I will use this information in my classroom to teach new words by making actions for each of the words and teaching them to the students. I can teach these words every day for 1 week. In my plan of implementation, I will teach students new words that occur frequently in a read-aloud by making actions for the words and putting them to a song. We will practice the song and actions every day for 1 week.